Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark Allen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyour-ear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
Word down your way. Testing 2, 2.
Welcome to another Word Down Your Way and the news that Al Stewart has announced a UK tour next October. A man I last saw playing in a field with a 25-piece orchestra at a festival near Clacton-on-Sea in Essex 53 years ago. It's fantastic to see you again, Al. Do you remember that festival?
Weeley. Well, I did, I think, 3 of these huge festivals right about that time, and I'm not sure which is which now.
Well, you came on after Status Quo and Barclay James Harvest and before Colosseum and King Crimson. Was that...
Yes, I remember it. Okay, I've got the most fantastic memory of this. King Crimson's roadie came on. I was playing Love Chronicles, actually.
Yeah, you were.
I was. And the King Crimson's roadie came on and actually managed to, he was adjusting microphones, and he actually managed to stand right in front of me, between me and the audience. So all I could see was the back of this roadie. I mean, I thought it was absolutely amazing that he would do that. And it's a memory I'll always have, because I was trying to look around him to see the audience, but...
It's such a performer's memory, isn't it? You know, of course, the one thing that's driving you mad is the bloke standing in your way. Well, we could see you, and we thought you were terrific, and you had an orchestra. Did I imagine that? I'm pretty sure you had a string section orchestra.
No, it was an imaginary orchestra, because I was just playing solo, if it's the gig that you're talking about.
I'm sure you had strings, but maybe not.
No, what they were... it was an optical illusion.
Okay.
But Love Chronicles was a 14-minute song, wasn't it? It took up the whole second side of Love Chronicles. Am I remembering that correctly?
No, you're not. It was much longer.
Was it really?
It was longer.
Was it? Okay. I'll shut up.
From my memory, actually 18 minutes long.
Yeah. But Al, what we wanted to do, we're going to talk about your upcoming tour. This is tremendous. We've got off to a good start here. Me imagining an orchestra that wasn't there, and they getting the timing of Love Chronicles completely wrong. That's the way it is. It was a long time ago, in our defence, wasn't it? But look, we were going to ask you about your first memories of any shows that you saw, because I think you were born in Scotland, but you grew up in Dorset, right?
I grew up in just outside Bournemouth, yeah.
Yeah. So, can you remember the first, the first gigs you ever went to?
Yes, there were lots of local Bournemouth bands. People have done amazingly well from Bournemouth, especially in the jazzier areas. I mean, Robert Fripp had King Crimson, obviously. Andy Summers, who joined the Police, spent 20 years playing without any noticeable success until he met Sting. And Andy had a jazz group. It was the Andy Summers Quintet, if I remember rightly, and he played Wes Montgomery things. And Greg Lake, I nearly joined a band with Greg Lake. He ended up in Emerson, Lake and Palmer. But there was another local band. There was a drummer called Lee Kerslake. And Lee ended up in some metal band, and I can't remember what they were called now. But I remember distinctly we were teenagers, and Greg Lake and Lee Kerslake and I were in a fast food restaurant, and we were all teens, and we were going to form a power trio, because I played electric guitar in those days. And we talked about it, and it never happened. But I mean, it would have been
Wouldn't that have been good?
What?
That would have been wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I don't know where that would have gone. I was already beginning to be seduced into the folk scene at the time. So, but I mean, I loved rock and roll. So,
the first groups that you were seeing were rock and roll bands. Can you remember the first concert you ever went to?
The first concert I ever went to, I should remember that. Yes, I do. It was what was then known as the Bristol Colston Hall.
Yes.
And, I was 13, and I was madly a big fan of guitar instrumental music. Hank Marvin obviously was an idol to me and everybody else, and who wanted to be a musician. But I had the chance to see Duane Eddy.
Right.
He was on tour with Bobby Darin, Emil Ford and the Checkmates, and someone else I don't remember. And Duane Eddy was one of my huge heroes, and that was the first rock concert I ever went to. And my mother took me, and I'm sitting there. And
that's wonderful.
Yeah. And what happened was I didn't know anything about guitars or amplifiers, and it seemed to me that the road crew were wheeling a refrigerator on stage, and I had no idea why. There's this giant thing, and there were 3 or 4 of them pushing it. In those days, apparently rock bands played through, Watkins Dominators or, like tiny little things like transistor radios. And it turned out that this giant refrigerator-looking thing was, in fact, an amplifier. And Duane Eddy came on and plugged into it. It was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in my life. And he goes down, 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 down. And I after 5 seconds, I do recall. It was deafening. I was actually physically pushed back into my seat just by the power of the thing, and I screamed in my mother's ear, "I want to do that." So that was it for me. I just never wanted to do anything else. And
David and I was saying earlier, actually, how it's interesting that you did kind of the opposite of Bob Dylan, really, who was acoustic and then went electric. And you actually were electric and then went acoustic, didn't you, later on?
Yes, that's exactly right. I had a moment of, I don't know, clairvoyance, I suppose. I eventually, at 17, I joined a local band, and we had a residency at a rock club in Bournemouth, and we'd play all the hits. We played Twist and Shout, I think 3 times a night because people kept asking for it, and I used to play Wipeout.
Wonderful.
And all these things, and Shadows things and whatever. And you played for an hour, and then there was a break for half an hour. And the band all went to the pub. There was a pub right across the street, and I didn't drink. So I had to find something to do with my time. And I'd already bought Bob Dylan's album, the second one called The Freewheeling. And I'd learned this song, Masters of War. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if I played it. Now, you've got to understand that the band played for 2 hours and nobody applauded anything. I mean, they danced, basically. And we played, down, 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 shake it up, baby. And, I was doing this for like a couple of hours, and the club was full. Everybody was dancing and bopping around, but nobody ever applauded anything. And I got out an acoustic guitar and I played Masters of War while the band was in the pub. The whole room went completely quiet. I mean, people were just standing in place. Nobody was saying anything. This is a noisy club. And after I finished playing Masters of War, they all clapped. And I thought, as Bob Dylan would later say, something is happening, but you don't know what it is.
Yes, absolutely.
And I thought, maybe there's something to this folk thing, it's because no one has ever applauded anything I'd done. Later in life, I discovered that was how Lonnie Donegan got his start, because he was a banjo player with the Chris Barber Jazz.
Yes,
he was.
The same thing happened with him. The band, Chris Barber and all the other guys, went to the local pub and had a drink. True. And Lonnie got out maybe a banjo, maybe an acoustic guitar, and started singing, like American folk songs. And again, no one had ever clapped anything he'd ever done, but they all started applauding. Now, eventually, what happened with him was that people had gone to see Chris Barber, but eventually what happened, because he made a regular thing out of it, was that they started going expressly to see Lonnie Donegan. And they stopped caring about Chris Barber, which of course annoyed him immensely, I think. The same thing began to happen to me. People were coming, they wanted to hear Bob Dylan songs. They came for the intermission. And I thought, well, if this is going on in Bournemouth, where no one has ever heard of Bob Dylan in 1963, maybe if I went to London and started doing this in folk clubs, it would lead to something. So that's what happened.
So where did you go first? Was it was it Bunjies Coffee House?
Yes, it was Bunjies Coffee Bar.
So you literally turned up with a guitar and said, "Can I play?"
No, I didn't. No, it didn't go like that at all. It was a really weird thing. I had a guitar in my hand because I always had a guitar in my hand in those days. And I walked in, and I walked almost into it immediately. The owner of Bunjies, a guy called Lou Hart, and Bunjies ran every single night, and with different residents. There were people who played every Wednesday and people who played every Thursday, and a vacancy had come up for Friday night. And Lou looked at the guitar. And he said, "Are you a folk singer?" Now, of course, I wasn't a folk singer. I didn't know anything about that at all, apart from the fact that at this point I'd learned a whole pile of Bob Dylan songs. And so I smelled a gig. He said, "Are you a folk singer?" And I said, "Yes."
Of course. Who isn't?
And he said, "Can you play every Friday? Can you start on Friday?" I said, "Yeah, of course." I only knew about 3 songs at the time.
So you didn't audition you? You didn't have to play anything? He just said start on Friday?
From my memory, I didn't have to. He just wanted to know if I was a folk singer, and I said yes. So I had a couple of Bob Dylan albums, and I went back to where I was staying, and I learned every single track on those 2 albums. And then on Friday, I turned up and I played them all. And
did you buy a peaked cap and a harmonica as well, or just?
There's a picture of me wearing a peaked cap.
Oh, right.
I never learned the harmonica, but I did get through the gig. I had to play for, I don't know, an hour and a half or something. There were 2 people. There was one other guy who was doing it, and we shared the night. We did 3 songs, and then the other person did 3 songs. And Lou's only comment was, "You sure play a lot of Bob Dylan songs." But Bob Dylan was very popular in London at the time. I don't think the rest of the country had ever heard of him. And so I rapidly got, he's the guy who plays the Bob Dylan songs. We've got to go listen to him. Okay, that was the first thing that happened. The next thing that happened was, as you say, Les Cousins, the most famous London folk club, contemporary folk club, opened in, I think, April of that year. And I was told by an Irish folk singer called Noel Murphy that this club had opened. Murphy. God, yes. Yeah. So Noel took me over there, and I went down, and there were maybe 12 people there, and there was a guy playing the guitar. And it was the most ridiculously wonderful guitar I'd ever heard in my life. And it sounded like 3 guitars. I played with a pick in those days, and I'd never seen anyone play fingerstyle. And this guy was playing all these notes. And it turned out that his name was Bert Jansch. And I thought he was the best guitar player I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, playing acoustic guitar. And and it became obvious very, very soon that the Cousins was the place to go if you liked, acoustic guitar music. And it also became very obvious immediately that if you couldn't play Angie, nobody was going to listen to you.
This is it.
Yeah, you wouldn't get through the door. Absolutely.
Angie, and it was a fingerstyle thing. And
I could play it too. Everyone did. But it was compulsory. And also Bert's version of it was absolutely seamless, wasn't it?
Bert's version was wonderful. And it took me, I don't know, 2 or 3 months just to make my, the pick, the thumb pick had to go dum 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 dum, and the fingers had to play gadiddle ding gadiddle ding, but it had to be coordinated, and I couldn't do it. I mean, like I said, it took 2 or 3 months. before I could do it. And eventually I found I could play some version of Angie, and then I started to be accepted. But until you can play Angie, nobody in Bournemouth would listen to you in those days.
And go on. I was going to say the people who were there. It was Cat Stevens, Van Morrison. Is that right? Ralph McTell, Roy Harper.
Yeah, I knew all those people. Obviously.
Any memories of any of them?
Oh God, yes. Well, let me get to my. Let me finish this thought.
Oh yeah.
Around about the same time, I can't guarantee it was April, but Bob Dylan actually came to play the Royal Albert Hall, and you have to understand that the Beatles in those days played maybe 25, 30 minutes. That was it, and they would be on a bill with a comedian and a juggler and Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, and it was sort of like a mixed thing. But you didn't get very much of the Beatles. They'd play maybe 7 songs if you were lucky. And I did see them in 1963, and I actually met them in 1963 because we blagged our way backstage pretending to work for Rickenbacker Guitars. But that's another story. And so I saw Bob Dylan. He came on. He played for 2 hours, no opening act, just an acoustic guitar, no band, no anything. I mean, he just came on and played for a couple of hours. You could have heard a pin drop. It was absolutely amazing. So I'm trying to learn Angie. I'm trying to be a folk singer. And I suddenly realized there's a lot more to this folk business than I thought. You've got to be able to hold an audience, hold their attention for 2 hours. I mean, I couldn't believe that Bob Dylan was able to do that. It was a whole new world to me. And then, big time, this is where it all takes off. I'm living, I don't have any money at the time. So I'd heard that there was this woman in the East End of London who put up folk singers for free because she liked folk singers. And so I went and stayed there, and I'd been there about 2 months, I think. And I was in this room, and she said, "You've got to move out of the room." Well, that didn't sound too good. Where am I going to go? She said, "Well, you can be in the room next door. It's not as big, it's not as nice, but there's this American folk singer who always stays in the room you're in, and he's going to come in the next couple of days. So I'm going to have to move you next door." And so the American folk singer turns up as this little guy, and his name is Paul Simon. Paul comes in, and I think I probably spent a couple of months or something with Paul. Artie Garfunkel turned up later, and he stayed there too. And Paul was writing all these songs, and I was in the next room. And when you write a song, you immediately want someone to listen to it. And so Paul would come out, and the only person in the apartment at the time was this stupid kid, as he would say, which was me. And so Paul would have to play me, all these songs he was writing. And he finished off a song called Homeward.
Give us an example of what they were.
Homeward Bound, go on.
Homeward Bound, yeah. I believe he started it on a railway station in Crewe. And but he finished it in the room next door to me. So he comes out and he says, "Okay, what do you think of this?" And he plays Homeward Bound. And I say, "Well, it's not bad."
It's okay. Good, but it's no Angie.
Yeah. Well, Paul recorded Angie later.
He did.
Yeah, he did.
So he the next day he wrote a song called Richard Cory. Now he comes out and he plays Richard Cory, and I'm absolutely thrilled. They say that Richard Cory owns one half of this whole town with political connections to spread the wealth around. Big argument. Jackson Frank was living there. Paul wrote to spread his wealth around, and Jackson, who knows a thing or two about all of this, and if you're rich, what you would say is to spread the wealth around. So then we all argued for about 3 hours about this one word. But I ended up telling Paul, he really didn't want to hear this. I said, "Richard Cory is the hit. It's the best thing I've ever heard this year. It's an absolutely great song. That thing you wrote yesterday, throw it away. It's never going to."
You're wasting your time. Oh, that's fantastic.
I began a long and illustrious career of getting everything wrong in terms of commercial potential.
But you were starting to understand about doing songs, performing songs that had a story to them. Is that fair? Yeah. That comes out of that.
That's why I like Richard Curry, and that's why I like Bob Dylan. Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. Any of these things, they were all magnificent, I thought. Yeah. So Cat Stevens has had 4 names since I've known him. His dad ran a Greek restaurant in Soho, and so he began with a Greek name, which I've now forgotten. But when I met him, he was 18, and his name was Steve Adams. And one day he came in with, you remember the little paper bags that they put 45 RPM records in?
Yeah.
You buy the record from the store, they put it in this little bag. And Steve, who is now Yusuf, anyway, he was Steve at the time, came in with a little paper bag, and he was being very coy. I didn't know why. And he said, "I've made a record." I said, "You've made a record? You're 18. You only know 2 songs." And because I would put at this point, I was the compere at the Cousins, and it was my job to put people on stage. And I'd give them all 3 songs, and he only knew 2 when I met him. So he'd only play 2 songs. And I said, "You can't have made a record. You've only written 2 songs." He said, "Well, I wrote another one." And I said, "Well, can I see the record?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, the record company changed my name." And I said, "What do you mean they changed your name?" It turned out that the record was called "I Love My Dog." And because it was called "I Love My Dog," they changed his name to Cat Stevens. But he was really shy about this, and he would not show me the record. It took half an hour to make him. So he said, "You'll laugh." I said, "I won't laugh. I promise I won't laugh. Just show me the goddamn record." And after about half an hour, he very sheepishly took it out of the paper bag. And sure enough, it said, "I Love My Dog" by Cat Stevens. Of course, I laughed.
By a weird coincidence, we interviewed the person last week who'd done a whole book of early press releases and all the early news stories. And the first news stories about Cat Stevens were entirely based on a guy called Cat sings a song about a dog. So it did work. It did actually get him attention.
It did.
Bizarre.
It's bizarre. I mean, he was actually trying to be a folk singer. I mean, his life's ambition, I think, was to actually get booked at the Cousins. And instead of that, he becomes a pop star. Now, the Cousins was owned and run by someone else who had a Greek restaurant. The Greek restaurant was upstairs and the Cousins was in the basement. And the guy who ended up running it was the son of the guy of Papa Matthews, who ran the Greek restaurant. And his name was Andy Matthews. And so he decided, after I Love My Dog came out, Steve Adams, Cat Stevens, whatever you want to call him, wrote a song called Matthew and Son because it was Matthew was the guy who ran the restaurant, and the son was Andy Matthews, who ended up running everything.
Do you ever run across Paul Simon or Cat Stevens or any of your old kind of mates from those years? Do you ever run into them now and catch up on?
I get kind of veiled messages. A lot of them have become famous. A lot of people I knew became famous, and I'd get a little message. I got a message from Paul not that long ago, and it just said hi. And David Bowie sent me a message, and Tori Amos has vanished off the face of the planet, but I knew her very well for a while.
Right. I just think it's interesting. All these people who must have turned up to do folk sets in 1965 are still incredibly well known. All these years later.
No, the one person I have seen, and I was actually on stage. We did a song together at Crockery. Is Ralph McTell, who you mentioned.
Right, of course, yeah.
For a very long time, and he's a very nice guy. Get on with him well.
But it is interesting that out of the people that you were booking there, just what an enormous number of them, as Dave was saying, went on to have an enormously successful careers.
Yeah, they I mean, it's all these people. Bowie, God, I mean, I did a gig probably 2 weeks ago with Rick Wakeman. We did a double-header concert, and I hadn't seen Rick for a while, but he had quite a career. So yeah.
Right. So when you perform live nowadays, I mean, do you talk about this stuff? Is this part of what you do, or is it just the songs, or what can people expect?
I am somewhat of a raconteur. I probably spend a third of the time on stage actually talking, saying all the things I'm saying to you.
Right.
Because I was as big a fan of literature and biography and raconteurism, if that's a word, as I was of music. I mean, the things that influenced me. I mean, okay, so songwriting is one. Making records is one, but I'm as influenced by biography or literature or history in particular, as you can tell listening to the songs. And one of the things I loved was the ability to, be a raconteur on stage. And my idol was Peter Ustinov.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think did it as well as anybody. I guess the other one would be Alistair Cooke.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's was a program on public television over here called Masterpiece Theatre, and it was introduced by Alistair Cooke. And so one of the things I most regret not being able to do when Alistair Cooke retired was I wanted his job.
Yeah.
I can imitate him almost perfectly.
Really?
Let's hear that.
Good evening. We're now at episode 5 of The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot.
Pretty good.
That's very, very, very impressive. That's
Very
great.
good.
So you tend to intersperse all the songs with some story about when that song was written, or maybe Les Cousins, or the history of the song.
Yes, or if I'm doing a historical song, obviously I would get into some of the background. At one point, I did a show in Florida, and it was at Fort Lauderdale, and it was in a bar full of surfers, who you wouldn't think would be interested in any of this. And I'd written a song which was a comparison of the characters of Helen of Troy and Cassandra, because they're total opposites. I mean, they couldn't be more opposite. And I started talking about the Trojan War. And I wasn't really thinking. I was just going through, all the things that happened in the Trojan War. And I realized I'd been talking for about 15 minutes. And I hadn't been really looking around. It was a dark room. I hadn't really been looking around. The whole room was totally silent all the time I was doing this. And I happened to look up, and the whole room was full of like blonde surfers with their mouths open, staring at me. And they'd never heard of any of this stuff. They didn't know who these people were. And I'm talking about, like Ajax, and there were two Iantes, as it turns out. And I'm going into minute detail about the Trojan War, and they're all listening, and they listened all the way through. And it was just astonishing. I mean, the teenage blonde surfers, and I'm telling them all this stuff. And I realized at that point that you could, if you can really do it, if you can engage people and you can talk about history, they will listen and they will be quiet. And it was somewhat of a revelation. I mean, I didn't know that I could do that. But then once I'd done it to a room full of surfers in Fort Lauderdale, I realized that you could do it to anybody and it would work, and it just does.
But also, it's often the information. It's what people say when they're talking in between songs that's more memorable and more remarkable than the song itself. That's the thing people often remember.
Well, I mean, I've been told, God, I wish I had $1 for every time I've been told this, but there are people who specifically come up after every single concert and say, the songs are okay, but what I really like is you talking. So I've adopted the Peter Ustinov technique, which is to, be funny and combine it with the Alistair Cooke technique, which is to be informative. If you can be both informative and funny, you're on a winning streak, really.
Yeah.
There are many signs, including in podcasting, of the increasing popularity of history. I don't know if you find that in the United States. It's certainly the case in Britain with the success of podcasts like The Rest is History. Do you think there is something going on generally that people's interest in history is increasing?
I don't know. I mean, I've been fascinated with history all my life. I mean, oh God, I mean, it's my most requested song is not Year of the Cat, it's Rose to Moscow, which is based on a book by Alexander Solzhenitsyn called One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. And of course, this is an opportunity because I studied Russian history all my life. And it's a wonderful opportunity to, get knee deep into the Barbarossa campaign, and and the roads to Moscow. You're following Guderian. I mean, like he got 30 miles outside Moscow. And the major battles, that happened. He got as far as Tula. I think he got past Tula actually. But it's an opportunity to, get deep into all of this, and people are fascinated. I mean, they said, "Oh, I didn't know this." I mean, the Russians lost tens of millions of people during the Barbarossa campaign, and Guderian was an incredibly good general. But not to get too deep into it here,
no, right.
He got turned around. He would have. I think he could have taken Moscow, but he got turned around in August of 1941 to do something called the Kiev encirclement. And instead of being allowed to go forward into Moscow, Hitler turned him around and had him encircle 750,000 Russian soldiers at Kiev. And by the time he, repaired all the tanks and everything, and after they'd taken all the guys prisoner, it was the beginning of October, and then it started snowing. And Guderian is still a long way from Moscow, and and then after it rained and it snowed, and the tank tracks got stuck in the mud, so they never got to Moscow. If Guderian hadn't been turned around and sent back to the Kiev encirclement, I think he could have taken Moscow. Stalin was at the beginning of October. I mean, everybody was, they were about to run. They thought it was going to fall for sure. But then Stalin, to his credit, decided to stay put and fight. And then General Winter, as the Russians call it, stepped in and basically stopped the Germans in their tracks.
If you hadn't been successful as a songwriter and performer, would you have been a history lecturer?
Yes, I think so.
I would have thought. I could imagine you being phenomenally good at it.
Yes. Yes. Well, just to end this conversation, on December the 5th, with the Germans stuck freezing, they were in their summer uniforms. I mean, they were literally, frostbite was killing more of them than the enemy. And on December the 5th, 40 fresh divisions turned up in front of them. These are the Siberian divisions. And Stalin had taken them. They were supposed to be defending against Japan, but he took all of them and brought them off to the front outside Moscow. And the Germans, who were freezing to death and stuck in the mud and stuck in the snow, were suddenly attacked by all these fresh divisions in their winter coats on skis. Because this was completely crazy, because the Germans could hardly move, and the Siberian divisions were attacking them on skis. On December the 6th, they started pushing them back. On December the 7th, and you'll understand why I'm leading up to this, the Japanese, thinking that Moscow was about to fall, attacked the Americans at Pearl Harbor. And then Hitler did the most insanely stupid thing, probably in the history of warfare. And he declared war on America. No need to do this. I mean, he wasn't part of this fight. I mean, no need to do it at all. Technically, he was allied with Japan, but you don't suddenly declare war on America. It's completely mad. So now Hitler is fighting not only the Russians, who are pushing him back, he's just declared war on America, and he's also fighting the British Empire. So, I mean, he's going to lose. There is no possible way that the Germans are going to win now. So it just those 3 days, the 5th, 6th, and 7th of December 1941, basically decide his fate. now I can get off history and we can talk about something else.
That was a perfect podcast in itself, actually.
Yeah. So this tour, dare we say, is this tour your final tour? Is that the idea? Is it billed as a farewell tour or what?
Well, it is a farewell tour, but the operative word, and I'm very careful with words, as you know, the operative word is not farewell. The operative word is tour.
Right.
Because the older you get, there's a limit to how many gigs you can do in a row. And especially if you're driving 200 miles a day and having to do a show that evening. I'm not saying I'm not going to do any more gigs. I just don't want to do tours.
Right.
So it's a farewell tour. It's not a farewell.
Right.
So you could carry on doing local shows and just
we do
nearby in America.
I don't want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning every day and fly to Cincinnati that way. But if it's like an important gig, if we're doing the London Palladium or something like that, or the Albert Hall, certainly I would do that. But to have to travel for 8 hours and then play to 100 people in in the middle of nowhere it just isn't appealing to me anymore. I've done that for 60 years. I think
Yes.
I think I'm allowed.
Fair enough. No, we totally understand. So, are there songs that you always play, and the things that people can expect they will definitely hear?
Yeah, I mean, there are 3 songs I have to play because they were all hits. At least in America, they were. Year of the Cat, obviously, and Time Passages, both of which made the top 10 here in America, neither of which made the charts in England because I've never had a hit in England. Can you believe that? 60 years. And I've never even made the top 30. And then the other one is On the Border, which actually is the most popular song, I think, that I do.
Right. So, well, that's something to look forward to. So that's in the UK in October. What date are you playing in London? Do you know that yet? Don't worry if you don't.
I might have it here. It's... do you know how many gigs I've got on my right now lined up? 57. And I'm almost 80 years old. What? Look at all this. There are 4 pages of gigs here. I mean, that's crazy. Why is that going? I thought I'd be long retired, and I'm playing all over the world. Actually, I think I've got 59 because 2 of them are cruises, and you do multiple shows. Let me have a look at this. Oh, London. Yeah, here it is. The 15th of October next year.
Right. We look forward.
Now, this is crazy because that's where I came in. You're old enough to know this. There was a television show called Sunday Night at the London.
Certainly was.
We remember it. Yes.
Forsyth and then some other guy.
With the carousel at the end with everybody waving.
Yes, everybody waving.
Somebody didn't refuse to do it. Was it the Stones? Somebody refused to do it.
Stones.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I used to, when I was just a young teenager when I started watching this, and we watched it every Sunday. My parents would, turn on Sunday nights at the London Palladium. Frank Sinatra, I remember, came out one time and he was smoking a cigarette in between singing. And of course, I loved it. Duane Eddy was on, and then all these people played that. And so that was almost an introduction to popular music. So the bookends of what you could loosely call a career, I mean, I don't know what you would call it, were that I began by watching Sunday Night at the London Palladium, and what is possibly my last gig will be the London Palladium.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, look, it's been great talking to you, and
nice talking to you.
Really enjoyable. And I have to say, I've learned a great deal about the fall of Moscow and other things.
The great thing is, of course, it never fell.
Never fell.
It never fell. No, precisely.
Yeah.
Almost.
Moscow's. There have been 3 great invasions from the West. Charles XII of Sweden had a crack at it in the early 18th century. And then Napoleon had a crack at it. Napoleon actually got into Moscow, but then, of course, he lost most of his army on the way out. And then Hitler had a crack at it. But Moscow has never been...
No, it's never fallen. You're absolutely right.
It's never been successfully invaded from the West. Now, contrast that with the invasions from the South, going back to the Golden Horde and the Mongols and all these people. It's been... what comes up is that you can successfully invade Moscow from the South, but not from the West. And of course, there wasn't anyone from the East or the North. So
let that be a lesson to people.
Yeah.
There we are.
Actually, the Poles got in there in, I think, 1612. But they got chased out too. So,
well, Al, very, very good to talk to you. And we shall let you know when this is up and look forward to the tour enormously. Very nice to see you.